Well, thank you. I'm excited to be presenting on this topic where we do a lot of work, and there's a lot of, as you're aware, there's a lot of corporate website work being redone with the advance of mobile and tablet experiences. Organizations are going back and really looking at their corporate presence and how they need to deal from a multi-channel, multi-device perspective. We seem to have a full house. I'm excited to be speaking to you folks. Without further ado, we'll get going. Just to quickly introduce myself, I've been working in the B2B space for over a decade, helping organizations in legal, high-tech, manufacturing, several for organizations all the way from Fortune 500 to mid-sized organizations, and really helping them think about, from a B2B digital marketing perspective, what did they need to do with their assets. It's been an interesting journey, and it continues to evolve. All right, so let's get going. So your website is one of your most important assets. And why is it so important, right? It's the first impression, right? When someone walks through the door, quite often they never see the organization, but they see the website. The website influences their decision-making. They make assumptions about who you are and what you do. So quite often it's perhaps the most important digital marketing asset that you have, and you need to do it well for you to be successful. And what we found in the research that we've looked at, recently and earlier, buyers are using the website to find you. They find vendors, and that's the change in B2B digital marketing, where buyers come to you as opposed to quite often you going to them. They find the opportunities. They find you when they identify the opportunity. And that's quite important in context of the website, because where do they go? The number one asset that you're working on, and the asset that gets used, is your website, is your corporate website. And it's quite important for you to make it a key digital asset around which you actually execute your digital marketing capabilities. So at this stage, before getting going, I'd love to do a little bit of a survey to just ask a question around how you're performing, how you feel about your own corporate website. It'll be interesting to see the feedback that we get. We've got so many people on this webinar. So we've just launched a poll. You'll see it appear on your toolbar. So if you could take a few minutes and just respond to the poll, let's see what kind of results we get. So the question is, what are the key issues that you see with your website, right? So it doesn't drive leads, doesn't communicate value in messaging, for user experience. A lot of you are thinking all of the above, but I'm trying to get to priority. So let's see what we get here. Not a big surprise. I'm going to let it run for another 10 seconds and then give you the results. Great. All right. So the results are in. 70% doesn't drive leads. Not uncommon. Quite often, whenever we work with our clients, large or small, this is where it starts. Not enough leads means impact to revenue. But the others are just as important. Communicate value in messaging. Well, it impacts how you drive leads. Experience drives leads. So doesn't drive leads could be is the result. Quite often the drivers could be other things. But it's just good to know. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you can consider when you think about your corporate website, when you think about your digital journey, and what you intend to do with your website. It's a living, breathing thing. It really is. You have to continuously work on it. You have to improve the experience on an ongoing basis, and it should never stop, right? So thinking about the various things you should consider, not only from when you're doing a new redesign or rebuild, but on an ongoing basis is quite important. And it quite often starts with strategy, understanding where you are today and where you need to get to. And preparing a plan to get there. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about experience, the importance of experience and how it impacts the satisfaction that it drives with your users. Content. Well, not only content, but context. So content and messaging is so important, but just as important is context, as in who your buyers are, who the users are on the site, what are their interests, understanding that, segmenting them, and giving them the information they want. What context really does is what marketers are trying to get to, right? The right message to the right person at the right time happens when you understand context. And there are wonderful technologies now that allow you to do that. The power of search. There's, people coming to your site quite often come with a shovel, and they have to dig for information, and all the navigation structure and format that you lay out is not adequate. They need specific information, so the power of search is so important. Multi-channel, so mobile, tablet, web. There's a lot of work that we're seeing. 50 to 60% of the new initiatives that we hear about are typically driven by the need for mobile, and quite often organizations are doing mobile, considering how mobile is just as important as web. Social media, B2B marketing is about creating conversations and engagement. And social media is perhaps even more important in the B2B context than B2C, because B2B marketers really need the ability to create conversations with their buyers. And social media is the ideal mechanism for you to have, unobtrusive, non-invasive conversations with them, understand their perspective, but then influence them. Build a great website, perhaps they may not come. So search engine optimization is very important in driving traffic and lead conversion. So driving leads, right? So a lot of the things that we talked about lead up to conversion. What is that tipping point? When does someone convert and become a lead? And how do you make that happen? And the underlying technology that that influences everything. So the content management system, the CRM, how it all comes together, how does it influence the website? So there are many other things, but when we're kicking off initiatives with our clients, these 10 things are typically top of mind and that we go through. So what we're going to be doing as part of this conversation is going through these. There's a lot to cover, but we're going to touch on these at a high level. If there's any further detail we'll answer questions towards the end, but I'm always available to answer questions after. All right, let's get going. Strategy. So, what we're seeing is that organizations, the websites that are out there, are quite often marketing driven, right? So IT-led websites were where you used to go to your IT teams to update anything. Now, marketers have the power to update content, but these sites are still, they're spray and pray. You put content and you push it out there, but that's one way, right? Where organizations need to move towards is this whole notion of digital engagement. Digital engagement is personal, it's contextual, it drives predictive one-to-one marketing. So when someone comes to your site, you not only, it's a two-way street. You try to understand what they want, and you offer information that they're looking for. There's measurement that's focused on ROI, and you're trying to deal with a variety of experiences. And that's where digital engagement is. And we ask our clients to really think about mapping out what their strategy needs to be from start to end. If they're, try to understand where you are. If you're tactical, if you're just automizing, then how do you get from there to engaging, right? Where you're having one-to-one conversations on your website, where someone's looking for information, you can read their digital footprint and offer relevant information. We're able to profile your customers and sort of get a single view of a customer across channels. And you're able to target them where you're driving KPIs. And you're really converting these customers into advocates. And it only happens if they have these meaningful interactions with you. So there's a lot of information on this slide, but really what it comes down to is really understand where you are and where you need to get to. And quite often it's not jumping from one all the way to the other end, because there's quite a few things besides just technology that you need to make it happen. So really thinking about where you are and mapping out where you need to get to is probably where most initiatives should start. And even if you're not doing a new website, mapping this out will allow you to have a journey or a roadmap in mind in terms of how you're going to nurture and grow your website. So let's talk about user experience. Recent survey by eConsultancy revealed that organizations are losing revenue because of bad experiences, and it's so true. You look at the B2C context. You walk into a store, the experience is not great. The product might be excellent, but the experience just makes the satisfaction level drop, and you lose revenue. And it is so true. So getting the user experience right is so important. It'll drive satisfaction. It'll make the whole notion of fun, surprise, and make the site really engaging for your audience. So starting and really thinking about that user experience is so important. And it's across a variety of things. It's not just navigation and structure. It's all the way from branding all the way to design and everything in between. And what we typically see is organizations, again, because of the lack of insight, the idea is to put as much information up as possible, and then you end up with these content walls or crowded pages. Sitemaps, they are not structured in a manner that reflect the user's needs, so there's a gap there. Menus are not hierarchical. It's just very difficult to, just to navigate menus and navigation, and search is not easy. So these areas are leading to an impact in terms of, ultimately it leads to impact to revenue, and it's impacting the user experience. And sitemap and navigation, I can't stress on this enough. When HubSpot did a survey, and they asked customers in terms of what's important to them. Finding information, unsurprisingly, the obvious stuff, it is so important. And you need to think about how your site is structured in context of your buyers, and structure navigation. There's many techniques now in terms of mega navs and so on, where you can structure information, make it easy to get to information. So within user experience, sitemap navigation is so important. Structuring the page and really thinking about readability and font treatment and typology is important. So structuring information so that it's not overcrowded, and doing it in a manner that's easy to find, it's so important. If publishing sites, like the CNN.com and others can push up content and still make the page not seem that crowded and people can still navigate it, most B2B organizations can do it very easily. It just takes a lot of planning, but having that in mind is quite important. But also font treatment, where the eye falls on the page and how you read information. It depends on the font treatment that you apply, the colors and placement. So really, font treatment is just as important. Let's talk a little bit about content. Content drives leads. We're in the world of content marketing. It's, I guess, progressing from content to contextual marketing, as I say. The content is very important. The type of content, thought leadership, etc., will have a huge impact on the types of leads and opportunities you drive. And surveys have revealed all the way from blogs driving more visitors to driving more leads, and from just general content and product information on your site. So it's across the board. Content is really important. And when you think about content, it needs to start with basic questions. Are you communicating your elevator pitch? When I land in your website, the first question that comes to a person's mind is, who are they? What do they do? And what can they do for me? So those set of questions need to be answered. And your ability to effectively communicate that quite often, you can see it in the bounce rates. People come to your site, they get confused, they leave. Bounce rates are high. If you do an effective job communicating your elevator pitch, people stick around. So things to consider when you're thinking about content structure is having the right information. Architecture, merchandise your products and services. So, in retail, this word merchandising gets used quite a bit in B2C. But there's no reason why B2B organizations, even whether sell hardware products or soft products like software, they need to merchandise products and services. And if someone comes to your site, you've got to make the products and services really pop and meaningful and important for your buyers to consider them as being important. You need to really think about your content strategy. and where thought leadership will fall to drive leads. And these are some things that we'll chat about fairly quickly, but things to consider when you think about the experience of your site, because content will impact your experience. And it starts with information architecture, how content is structured across the site. And a lot of it has to be linked with how buyers buy. When you think about merchandising your products, as I alluded to earlier, it's not just soft and hard, it's both. You need to think about how to make your products pop. I mean, Apple is a great example. They have obviously beautiful products, but there's no reason why soft products in a B2B context cannot be made visually appealing or can be made to feel important. So merchandising products is very important in a B2B context. And it could be a service as well. But content generally, it's a challenge. It's not easy to produce engaging content. So if you're struggling with it, you're not the only one. Most organizations struggle with great content. It's not easy to produce, but you need to go down that journey of having content strategy in place and produce content and iterate with it, because producing engaging content that people actually consume and find meaningful, it's a journey and it's not easy. And thinking about a content strategy that creates meaningful content starts with buyers' needs. There's a new buyer out there, and we'll touch on that, but focusing on buyers' needs, understanding how they buy, targeting content to their buying life cycle, keeping copy minimal, ensuring that they get the information they want without you overwhelming them with copy or walls of content, and targeting them with thought leadership content, making it findable. And content is just not word content. We all know that we barely read on the web, right? When you look at a web page, just scanning, you're not really reading, and we all do this. So thinking about different types of content, such as videos, which are more engaging, could lead to, could improve your content strategy. And when you think about all your content, it has to be structured in a manner and implemented in your website so that it's easy to present visually and it can be used across the site, because quite often you're trying to cross-sell and upsell and using this content. So let's talk about this whole notion of a buying life cycle. Buying life cycle is how buyers buy. You've got segments of buyers, and they go across the buying life cycle in a stage-wise manner, and they buy. And then, they could move across phases pretty quickly. But every B2B organization has buyers, and they buy a particular way. So they typically have a need, and they go through the journey of actually making a purchase decision. And the decision, they're not making it online quite often, making it offline, but really understanding how they buy online, offline, and where the website plays a role is quite important. So really understanding who your audience is by segmenting them, understanding how they move across the buying life cycle, having relevant content being targeted towards them is the way to think about your content strategy. If you do this, you will find that you will have the right content available at the right location for the right buyers, and you're not really serving up this, again, called wall of content, which is really non-engaging, because you know what people are looking for, and you give them that content as opposed to saying, well, what can we put up there, right? It's a very different way of thinking about content. So once you map out the buying life cycle, we find that customers have, it's nirvana when they think about how to present content to their buyers. And in context of the content, thought leadership is quite important. In a B2B context, whether it's products, services, thought leadership around what the product is and the challenges it solves across that buying life cycle will drive leads and opportunities. So thought leadership is really important. And there are many mechanisms with it, white papers, to forums, to events, blogs, webinars. Different organizations use different mechanisms, but it's part of your content strategy, and quite often that's what drives leads, and that's what buyers find meaningful. And it positions you. So thought leadership marketing, I saw this quote, and it's the simplest way to position it, right? It's that valuable intellectual property that allows you to potentially, your potential usefulness to the client. And once you do that, they come and they share their information with you, and they become a lead. So if you share meaningful information with them, it's a two-way street. they will share meaningful information with you, which quite often is their lead information. So I see a lot of websites where they just have lead forms with nothing that they offer in return. It's a two-way street. So create meaningful content, which is targeting the buying life cycle, and put it behind forms. People will give information to you to get that information. And thought leadership marketing, it's a broad area. Coming up with the right content that people buy into and that targets their buying life cycle, it's not easy. And not going to go into a lot of detail here, but what we found very helpful is you need to have a point of view on a subject. You need to make a stand. It's got to be unique, meaningful content. You need to tell people something they already don't know, right? So if it's generic content, people are not going to come buy your content. We find organizations buying content, pushing it on their website. Not sure how effective that is. Buyers are smart. They understand when you're actually trying to communicate something as opposed to, just throwing content at them. So thinking about point of view, telling them something that they already don't know, focusing on verticals, telling a story and developing that voice is something that you should think about when you think about your thought leadership content. And once you've developed that content, you need to make it findable. It should be gated because they will give you information if the content is meaningful. And once they become, leads, then you have to think about the whole nurturing program that will drive leads and opportunities. And as I mentioned, content, you have to think about, different types of content. There's imagery, there's video, there's games. There's so many things that you could use to, for your content, and you can use them in many different ways. So we talked about content, right? They say content is king, context is probably queen, or context is king and content is queen. I don't know which is correct, but both are important. Without context, you just have content. And context marketing is a very important concept that we feel can really improve your website and that issue around driving leads. Context-driven marketing solves that. So really understanding how buyers buy, we looked at the buying life cycle, and targeting them with relevant information across the buying life cycle is context-driven marketing. Understanding a buyer's context and targeting them is what's important. So understanding who these buyers are, characterizing them, developing that content that we looked across the buying life cycle, and then automating a process to get them the content across the site is what will drive leads. And you can have dynamically generated content on the website based on who the buyer is and allow them to consume that content and become leads and make it meaningful for them. And for you to get context, quite often visitors will generate the content. So if they come to your website and they're on a particular product page, and they're spending a lot of time reading product information, brochure, you can segment them. They're telling you something about their preference. They're coming from a particular location, right? There's information out there which you can actually use just based on what they're telling you. And then externally available information. So you could ping databases and get information on, this B2B buyer is from a financial services industry. They're, interested in a particular type of product. So you can start to build external information and internal information. You can even layer this with social information and start to think about who this buyer is and segment them. And there are tools out there that can automatically help you start to do that. And it's iterative, so it's not a one-time thing. It's iterative, and the context starts to build. And once you do that, you get to a point where you start to, target buyers across their buying life cycle. So context does require a common view, and that's quite important. So just understanding how, looking at analytics on your website is not enough. You need to have a 360-degree view of how your buyers engage with you across channels. So if they're reading emails from you, if they're looking at product information, if they're on your website consuming information, if they're on your mobile site, they're interacting socially, building that singular view of a customer using analytics, etc. It is perhaps one of the most important things you can do with your technology, because it will give you it will give you the view of what various segments are trying to do with the organization, and they'll make you smarter about how to target them, how to be successful with targeting content against context. And once we talked about the whole notion of a buying life cycle, well, once you lay out the buying life cycle and you understand context, then you can start to map out messaging. So problems that need to be solved, information that people search, when they evaluate options, how do they do that? If you start to map this out against context, you can automate this on your website and offer relevant information for various buyers. You'll find that the amount of leads that you get, it goes through the roof. So it's very powerful stuff. And in B2B organizations, I find that customers are still scratching the surface with it. They're still building static websites, not websites which are dynamic and target context. We talked about segmenting the audience, mapping the messages. So in summary, if you want to truly be contextual, you need to understand the buying life cycle. You need to perform a segmentation exercise, and you need to create a content map that targets the buying life cycle. Understand, create a common view of the customer using technology, and then use dynamic capabilities to target buyers. So there's a lot that you can do around contextual marketing, but if you start to scratch the surface with contextual marketing, you'll find that your buyers are going to be very engaged with you. They're going to have meaningful interactions on your website as opposed to searching for information which is not relevant. Let's talk about the power of search. So many sites out there, they don't use search appropriately. Search is the #1 means of navigation on your site quite often. And that's really true. When they say navigation, people go search for information, and search drives them to a particular page, product, etc. on your site. So really understanding that search is so important will start to really make you think about how search should be leveraged to drive navigation on your site. So when you think about navigation, just don't think about, content structure, navigation, sitemap. Think about how search can drive users to get to information. And, we find that in all the research that we've seen, large percentage of visitors will tell you that they use search for finding information they need. So search, it need not be that complicated. It needs to be obvious, it needs to be consistent, it needs to follow best practices. So when you think about search and where it's placed on the site, how it's located, and how people can go look for information, you need to find the appropriate real estate to make that happen. And when you're searching for content, quite often you'll throw up a lot of results. Well, you can use faceted search to really allow users to find relevant information. So if it's by industry, by location, there's just so many things you can do. You have to think about what your products are and how people find your product information and what's important to them. They'll start to build out some of the facets that you'll need for your products and services. And then you have to think about all the various capabilities that you get out of the box these days. So auto-suggest when you're typing, type ahead, autocorrect in terms of, if they're not typing the right information. So all of these need to be built into search for users to get to the right information. Multi-channel is becoming more and more important. It's one of the most important things. And it's being driven by the smartphone revolution that we're all a part of. There are 100 million number of smartphone users, 100 million, this is a score that ComScore came up with, and it's phenomenal what we're seeing in terms of usage of your website. I'd encourage you to really have analytics in place to see how your website is being consumed. You'll see some surprising stats in terms of how people are coming to your site, and more surprising will be, if you really look deeper, is where they go. They are using their mobile phones for specific things quite often. Searching a location, looking up a product, and so on. So really understanding various devices and how they get used, whether it's desktop, mobile, tablet, and really having analytics in place will give you insight to how these users use your site. Again, the amount of usage of tablets and smartphones has been rising. So it's interesting for you to really think about how you're going to leverage it. So quite often when we think about mobile, the first thing that comes up is, do we need a mobile app? Well, perhaps you do, perhaps you don't. Quite often when clients bring up a certain scenario, I quite often have to respond and say, well, you don't need an app for that. And it really is true, because you need a mobile site, maybe that's responsive and targets devices. You don't need to go out and build an app for everything. Apps are good when there's information that needs to be accessible even when you're offline. There's specific tasks they need to go after. Apps are cool, but they're not necessary. There's a lot that you can accomplish just by having responsive mobile sites. And as you think about mobile, you have to quite often think about mobile first. The smartphone revolution is such, if you're looking to redesign your site, the last thing you should be thinking about doing is creating a separate website, a separate mobile site, building them separately. It all has to come together, and it all has to be done in a manner that one technology responds to different devices and offers content that's consumed appropriately on those devices. So quite often organizations are trying to look at this mobile-first strategy because of the growing usage of phones that we touched on, and it's becoming quite important. So you need to take a look at your analytics to see where your buyers are coming from, where your users are coming from, what are they looking for, and those will give you some of the answers you need from a mobile perspective. And getting to a mobile-first website strategy, quite often, there's technology available now, such as HTML5, CSS3, and they allow you to respond to various devices. And now I'm not saying they're perfect for every scenario, but quite often that's the answer. You could create, when you're doing a new website or you're doing a refresh, you can create one site that responds to various devices and offers information in a meaningful manner on those devices. So thinking about these responsive design considerations quite often is a way to look at things. So the conventional approach might be, building a site for, perhaps mobile and then site for web. But now responsive would allow you to target information across those devices in a manner that responds to those devices. You build a site once as opposed to building a site for every device, and it responds to those devices, and quite often that's the way to look at things. Question comes up, what's better? It depends. It depends on what you're looking to get done. So if you need to update the site easily, responsive, you're doing it in one location and it will cater to all devices. So responsive is the way to go. If you're looking for built-out sites faster, so you can roll out a website a lot faster than a responsive site. If you want to target specific needs, perhaps you need to consider a separate mobile site. So there's not a perfect answer, but there needs to be a good reason for you to have a separate mobile site rather than building a responsive site that caters to multiple devices. And I can save you a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of frustration and maintenance later on. So something that we recommend that clients really think through when they're making decisions. And here's some examples of some, great content sites that cater to multiple devices, right? They respond to the appropriate device and they cater and offer information appropriately. Navigation changes, content structure changes, and so on. Social media, no conversation on the website today can be had without really thinking about social media. And social media is so important in the context of B2B marketing. And the reason really is it's quite simple. B2B marketing, the decision is not, a B2B buyer is not making an instant decision quite often. And there's this period where they're considering products. And social media is the ideal opportunity for you to engage with the audience, with your buyers in a meaningful manner and share information. So, I believe that in many ways it's more useful in the B2B context than B2C context, because you can really have meaningful conversations with your buyers and influence their thinking. And the data out there is supporting this. In social media marketing report, 56% of B2B marketers reported acquiring new business, by using social media. So it's here and it's now. So just don't think in terms of your toolbar. Think in terms of a real social media strategy on your website. So blogs quite often come into the picture. So blogs allow you to create content which perhaps can be a bit informal as well, and you're promoting thought leadership across channels. So creating blogs and rolling it out through your social media strategy will not only promote your website, but will create engagement with your buyers. Think about the social media buttons. All sites need to have, the appropriate social media buttons. If you have a Facebook page, a Twitter page, it all needs to be linked. And that's quite important. That's the least of what you should be thinking of doing. But you've got to be careful of not overdoing it. We see Twitter feeds on home pages where it's not necessary. You have to think about if it's relevant, then it should be there. But if it's not, don't overdo it. Let's talk about SEO. You build a beautiful house with your website, but no one shows up. That's something you don't want. So building your website in a manner that it's optimized is really important. And when you think about your content strategy and coming up with content, SEO should be a part of that strategy. So think about content in context of SEO and use appropriate keywords where, based on, there's a lot of tools out there that will tell you what buyers are looking for. So have that in there and ensure that you have links coming to your site, inbound and outbound, and do it in a manner that it's, it's not bordering on something that's not right. So do it in the appropriate manner. It'll drive relevancy, but ensure that your site is showing up on directories and so on. Ensure you have targeted URLs on your website. So having friendly URLs are very, very important for your website to get found. And we see so many sites where the URLs are just not targeted, not friendly. Use meta keywords and tags and descriptions within the site, and you've got to make sure that this is in there. Otherwise, your site rankings will be dropping. Title tags are quite important, so ensure that you have this. This is all hygiene, right? You just have to do simple stuff, and it impacts SEO. Talk about conversion, right? So people are on your site, buyers are there. Ultimately, they've got a tip, right? And you've got to have the right call to action on your website, asking for relevant information behind which perhaps is content. So you've got to think about how do we offer engaging content and put call to action that gate that content so people are willing to give information to get something. So forms are quite important, and there's a lot of research around how to make forms more effective, right? So making the message key, that it's not going to take forever. In this case, for example, with GoToMeeting to download the software or create an account. It's going to be very quick. All you're offering is a few pieces of information. They could have had a long lead form, but they didn't. So depending on what you're offering, you can ask for more information, or you could do it progressively over time. And what drives leads? Call to action, the page layout, offers, promotions. So those of you who are thinking about not getting adequate leads, as you think about your strategy, user experience, SEO, etc., you also have to think about what drives conversion. And these are some of the things that you should be looking into that drives conversion on your website. And you need to continuously test. And I can't stress this enough. Whatever you come up with in phase 1 of a launch of a website, I'll tell you 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be where you need it to be. And don't get disappointed with that. That's just how it is. So you need to go through this journey of continuously testing. What that really means is taking content, putting it out there, using using strategies like A/B or multivariate, and testing content. And you'll find that your messaging will improve. Some things will hit, some things will miss. But if you're constantly testing, you're going to get better at it. So various tools can be used to assess and see, how to make things sticky on your site and how to test. So A/B testing, customer journey analysis, multivariate testing, user testing. There's a whole bunch of things and capabilities and tools and strategies you can apply. But start with A/B testing. It's the easiest thing to do, and it's easy to roll out, and it'll give you really good results if you're not doing it already. And final thing is technology. Final sense and final area is technology. you need the appropriate technology to drive conversion, drive leads. And, it wasn't as if I'm talking about conversion and driving leads, not because, I'm creating this slide deck as we're talking just based on the feedback we got when we did the survey. It's because that's where the issues are. The issues are that, you're not getting adequate leads on your website. So using the appropriate tools that drive conversion is important. So analytics is so important on your website. Ability to do testing is important. Content management system, having the appropriate CMS is so important to drive conversion. So you need the right capabilities on your site to be able to drive conversion. The content management system is really the hub of your website. If you don't have the appropriate CMS, quite often your website will become static over time, and essentially over time your results will stop to come through. So picking the right CMS for a marketer, it's not a technology decision. Picking a CMS is a marketing decision. And marketers really need to go through the journey of picking the right CMS, because those are the tools, that's the tool that they'll have levers in to update content, manage the experience, do testing. So it's quite important for you to pick the appropriate platform and go through the journey of really looking at, what it offers, is it easy to use, what kind of features out there. There's a lot of tools out there, so it's not an easy decision because there's a lot of consolidation, commoditization taking place in the market. But, picking a great tool will really impact your ability to create a great website. The importance of search cannot be overstated, right? Appropriate search tool will drive navigation, will drive ease of use, so getting to the right content is quite important. So don't overlook search. Analytics, we talked about cross-channel analytics, so across web, mobile, email, cross devices, the ability to see where people are consuming certain information, getting that one view of the customer, and then contextually targeting them. It only happen if you have the appropriate analytics tools. And there's so many out there, you need to really consider the appropriate ones. And when you think about your site, really think about your content management system, your email automation, B2B context, marketing automations almost become mainstream, and your CRM system really coming together so you get this common context of the customer that you can target. And if you target the appropriate single view of the customer, which is where you fed information across channels and you're gathering insight, you'll find that it'll impact your ability to convert traffic to leads and create meaningful interactions with your buyers. So I think we did well there. We're right at close to 2:45 Eastern time, so 15 minutes to go, and that's the amount of time we had left for questions. So brilliant. So at this point, I'll ask the organizer to field any or all questions which are there.
Yes, Rao, we do have a lot of questions, but since we're running out of time, I don't think we'll be able to take all of them. I'll just take a couple of them, and then we'll get back to the rest of the questions via email after the webinar is over. So the first question that has come is, what are the benefits of connecting marketing automation and CMS tools?
Well, that must have been the last question because that's the last slide we looked at. So you can truly do multi-channel targeting if you connect the two tools. So if you have a content management system that drives your website, you have a marketing automation tool that sends out email, and if you're doing that, then if you're executing both those in silos, and that's where 99% of, I would say, B2B marketers are today. You're not really doing justice to really understanding what buyers truly want, and then targeting their context. So your website, the email tool, they're all connected. When someone comes to your website, converts to a lead, they are driven to email. You target them with appropriate content and thought leadership. They land up on your website again. You've got to put the customer in the middle and really think about how they interact with you. And once you connect these two tools, you're able to then target them. Get a single view of the customer across email, web, mobile, and then target them in a consistent and cohesive manner, if you will.
Thanks. The next question is, what is the time constraint for creating a responsive design site? Does it mean we have to start from scratch, or we can rebuild the entire website?
Yeah, it does take longer. There's no doubt about that. There's more thinking involved, more than the build out. It's the thinking that's involved in when you go from one device to the other, what needs to be offered, what's relevant for that device, and how the information needs to be restructured. So there's more work involved from an information architecture and user experience perspective more than anything else. So you are doing more design work, you are doing more IA work. It could be more, it could increase the amount of work on IA design anywhere from 20 to 40 to 50%. But ultimately, when you build it out and you're running these sites, you make up all that time back up by many folds. So it does take more time, but it's certainly valuable.
The next question is, what are the quick checkpoints for a satisfactory website user experience?
Well, that list of 10 that I provided, that's a good place to start. Having a strategy, thinking about user experience, having a content but also contextual strategy in place. Really think about, what do your buyers want? How do they buy? And how can you use technology to segment them and then target them with appropriate information, which is personalized and easy to consume? That's a great place to start. You think about SEO and all the other things. There's just quite a few things that need to be done, but there's a lot of tools out there that automate things like personalization and contextual targeting for you. So it's a matter of picking the right tools and then having the appropriate strategy in place, along with a great user experience, content, and context for you to be successful.
Great. I'll just take one last question, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions after the webinar via email. The last question is, how are microsites different from websites? Are they better for SEO and lead generation purpose?
Well, there's a lot of debate out there, of creating microsites within or doing it within the fold. There's pros and cons, like with most things in life. So in the case of microsites, you can have targeted content and information available, right, towards a particular audience. It's great if you're linking it to a particular campaign with email, inbound, right, outbound, inbound type scenarios. So if you're really thinking about offering a specific area, you don't want to crowd the user with other types of information. Doing microsites is great on particular campaigns, but you do lose something. So you lose in terms of SEO. If you do it in context of your large site, your main corporate website, there's so many benefits from an SEO perspective of, you getting found, which you perhaps may not occur if you create a separate microsite. So B2B marketers do a lot of microsites around products and information, and they do a lot of campaigns around them, but you can even do that in context of your own corporate website if you feel you'll get a lot of SEO type traffic in the future. So you can make decisions based on SEO, and then also they're thinking about, well, how much, what you're trying to accomplish on that particular microsite. That you don't want to crowd the buyer with too many different messages and confuse them. But you want to keep it simple and short. Maybe microsites is the way to go.
Great. Thank you, Rahul. At this note, I would like to end the webinar, and I would like to thank everyone for attending our webinar. We hope you found it informative. The webcast will be available on our website within the next 3 business days, and we'll also be sharing the webcast URL with all the attendees via email. Please feel free to reach out to us at contact@edynamic.net for any questions you may have. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out by email. I'll be more than happy to answer each and every one of them. Thank you. Bye-bye.
The organizer